Before we begin, here's a question to sit with. Have you ever been punished for someone else's fear of you? Have you ever been removed from a room not because you did something wrong, but because someone else could see exactly how right you were and could not afford for anyone else to notice? Drop your answer in the comments as you listen. Caleb Weston had built an empire on his ability to read people. He could walk into a boardroom and know within 60 seconds who was bluffing, who was afraid, and who was the most dangerous person in the room. He had never once been wrong, except twice. Both times, it cost him the same woman. Jade Morrison had not come to Weston Capital looking for a story. She had come looking for a job. She had come with a resume that spoke for itself and a quiet competence that made everyone around her better without ever announcing itself. She was the kind of woman who kept empires running from the inside, the person everyone depended on and no one fully saw, until the woman who saw her most clearly decided she needed to disappear. This is the story of what happened when the most powerful man in the room was the last one to understand what was really going on. There is a particular kind of hurt that comes from being wronged by someone who should have known better, not a stranger, not an enemy. Someone who had seen your work, depended on your presence, benefited from your excellence, and still chose someone else's word over yours. If you have ever been that person, the one who was let go, pushed out, set aside by someone who did not look closely enough, this story is going to find something in you. I want you to stay with it. To my family who has been here from the beginning, you already know what this space holds. You are the reason I keep coming back. To those who are new, you arrived exactly when you were supposed to. Welcome. Before we begin, one small ask. If this story reaches something true in you today, write, "She built it better" in the comments. Not for me. For every woman who has ever had to prove her worth to a room that already decided it did not want to see her. Now, let us begin. Caleb Weston had not started wealthy. That was the part of him that the profiles always mentioned and the man himself never talked about. He had grown up in a mid-sized city in Ohio, the son of a mechanic and a school librarian, in a house where money was not a source of comfort but a source of tension. He had worked his way through college on scholarships and part-time jobs, graduated with a finance degree and $3,000 in savings, and had built Weston Capital from a single rented office and a borrowed printer into one of the most respected private equity firms on the East Coast. He was 51 years old. He had been worth over $2 billion for the last 8 of them. And somewhere in the building of all of it, he had become someone he would not have recognized at 22. Not cruel, not dishonest, but sealed. Closed in the way of people who have learned that moving fast requires traveling light and have applied that logic to every area of their lives, including the emotional ones. His office on the 38th floor of the Weston Capitol building was the kind of space that communicated everything about the man before he walked in. Immaculate, precise, the desk clear at the end of every day because Caleb Weston did not leave things unfinished. The shelves behind him lined with the kind of books that had actually been read, pages marked, spines cracked, margins annotated. One photograph, his parents, from 20 years ago, before his father's health had declined. Everything else in the room was function. He had been engaged before. Once, briefly, in his early 30s, a woman named Patricia who had been patient and good and whom he had eventually understood he was treating as a feature of his life rather than the center of it. She had ended it kindly. He had agreed it was the right decision and then worked for 14 hours straight the day after because that was how he processed things. For 15 years after that, Caleb Weston had been alone in the particular way of powerful men, surrounded by people at all times and genuinely known by none of them. Then a woman named Victoria Harlan had arrived at a board dinner 18 months ago, poised and polished, and exactly the kind of person who fit every visible requirement of his life. She was from old money, well-connected, effortlessly social in the rooms that Caleb found draining. She made his world easier. She handled the parts of his life that required warmth and presence and the particular performance of couplehood that came with his position. He had proposed after 8 months. He told himself it was love. He was not entirely sure he knew the difference anymore. Jade Morrison's world was a 30-minute subway ride and an entirely different universe from the 38th floor. She lived in a one-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood that was in the middle of becoming something different from what it had always been. Coffee shops appearing between laundromats, new paint on old buildings, the particular tension of a place caught between its past and someone else's vision of its future. Her apartment was on the second floor and had a window that looked out onto a fire escape, and beyond it a narrow strip of sky that turned extraordinary colors at dusk. She was 31 years old. She had a degree in business administration from a state university that she had paid for largely herself, a natural gift for organization that bordered on the architectural, and 6 years of experience in executive support roles that had taught her everything about how power worked from the inside. Who actually made decisions versus who performed making them, where the real leverage was in any organization, which problems were structural and which ones were personality. She had been Caleb Weston's executive secretary for 2 years before everything fell apart. In those 2 years, she had transformed the operational rhythm of his office in ways that had become invisible precisely because they worked so well. She had restructured his calendar so that he arrived at every meeting with the space to think rather than the aftermath of the previous one. She had developed a briefing system that reduced his preparation time by 40% without reducing his readiness. She had managed his correspondence, his travel, his board relationships, his donor communications, all of it with a precision and discretion that had made her, in practical terms, one of the most important people in the building. Nobody said this out loud. Nobody needed to. Jade knew her value. She had always known her value. She had grown up in a household where her mother had worked twice as hard as the people beside her for half the recognition, and she had watched that with clear eyes and made herself a promise. She would be excellent, completely, and without apology, and she would not beg anyone to see it. Either they saw it or they did not. Either they deserved her presence or they did not. She had kept that promise. She had not yet met the woman who would decide it made her dangerous. Victoria Harlan noticed Jade Morrison the way certain women notice certain other women. Immediately, completely, and with the particular calculation of someone assessing a variable they had not accounted for. It happened at the Weston Capital annual stakeholder dinner, 6 weeks after Victoria and Caleb had announced their engagement. Victoria had attended as his fiancée for the first time. Her role newly official, her position in his world newly visible. She had moved through the evening with the practiced ease of a woman who had been raised for exactly these rooms. And then she had watched Caleb Weston talk to his executive secretary. Not flirtatiously, not inappropriately, just with the specific ease of two people who had worked closely enough for long enough to have developed a shorthand. Jade had leaned in to remind him of something about the Henderson presentation, and he had listened and adjusted mid-sentence without missing a beat, and the two of them had moved together for a moment with the quiet coordination of people who trusted each other's judgment completely. Victoria had watched this for 45 seconds. Then she had smiled and introduced herself to the person beside her and filed what she had seen away in the careful cabinet of her mind. She was not a woman who acted on emotion. She was a woman who planned. The first setup happened 3 weeks later. It was elegant in its simplicity. Victoria had access to Caleb's private email through the shared calendar system, ostensibly for scheduling, practically for considerably more than that. A thread of messages appeared, carefully written, plausibly worded, the kind of correspondence that could be read 2 ways depending on what you were looking for. Communications between Jade and a competitor firm. Responses that suggested she had been sharing internal information. Nothing explosive, just enough to plant a question in the mind of a man who had built his entire career on not tolerating breaches of trust. Victoria did not show Caleb the emails herself. She arranged for them to be discovered by Marcus, Weston Capital's head of security, who brought them to Caleb with the reluctant gravity of someone delivering genuinely bad news. Caleb looked at the evidence for a long time. He did not call Jade in immediately. That was not how he operated. He sat with it for 2 days, turning it over, looking for the explanation that made it not what it appeared to be. He found none. Or rather, he found the absence of a counter-narrative, which is not the same thing as proof, but which felt, in the context of his particular decision-making style, like enough. He called Jade into his office on a Thursday afternoon. She walked in with her notebook and her tablet and her quiet professional readiness, exactly as she always did. He told her what had been found. She looked at him with an expression he would think about for months afterward. Not panic, not guilt, but the specific still shock of someone who has just heard something so untrue that for a moment their mind cannot locate a response to it. She said she had not done it. She said it clearly, without desperation, without tears. She said, "I have never shared anything from this office with anyone outside it. Not once. Not for any reason." He said he wanted to believe that. He said the evidence was difficult to explain. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "If you cannot take my word over a document you have not fully investigated, then this is not the place for me." She put her notebook on his desk. She walked out. He let her go. It was the first time he was wrong about someone. He would not know that yet for several more months. Jade did not collapse. She did not allow herself to. She spent one evening sitting very still in her apartment looking at the strip of sky through her fire escape window, and she felt the specific grief of being disbelieved by someone whose judgment she had respected, and then she made herself a practical list of what came next. She updated her resume that night. She called her closest friend Simone the following morning, a woman who had known her since university and who had the particular gift of being completely honest without being unkind. Simone said, "He will figure it out." Jade said, "Maybe, but I am not waiting for that." She found a new position within 6 weeks, chief of staff at a mid-sized consulting firm whose CEO, a woman named Dr. Anita Osei, had heard of Jade through a mutual contact and had made the offer before the formal interview was even complete. Jade built herself a new chapter. She did not look back. For months after Jade left, the cracks began to show. Not in Weston Capital's financials, the numbers were fine. The cracks showed in the operational tissue of the organization, the invisible infrastructure that had held everything together without anyone fully understanding who was responsible for it. Meetings ran over because the preparation was wrong. Travel arrangements collided with board commitments because nobody had been managing the overlap. 3 communications went to the wrong recipients in the same week. A donor dinner that Jade would have organized in her sleep turned into a minor logistical disaster that cost Caleb 2 hours of damage control he did not have. His new executive assistant, his third in 4 months, was competent and willing and completely unable to operate at the level the role required. Joel, his CFO and the closest thing he had to a genuine friend in the building, said it plainly one afternoon over coffee. "You know what the problem is?" Caleb said, "I have several problems right now, Joel." Joel said, "You have one problem wearing several faces. You let the wrong person go." Caleb did not respond. But that evening he pulled up Jade's personnel file and sat with it for a long time. He had not fully investigated the emails. He understood that now. He had acted on presented evidence without verifying its origin, something he would never have done in a business context, something he had done in this context because Victoria had been beside him when Marcus delivered the report, and her presence had somehow made the narrative feel more settled than it was. He started asking questions, quietly, methodically, in the way he approached every problem that mattered. Without announcing what he was looking for, without revealing what he had already found, he went back to the original email thread and looked at the metadata. He brought in an external security consultant he trusted. What emerged over 3 weeks of careful investigation was a picture that made his stomach drop. The emails had been created from inside the building. The IP address traced back to a device registered to the shared executive calendar system, a system that Victoria had access to. He sat with this information for 2 full days. Then he called Jade. She answered on the 4th ring. Her voice was professional and measured and gave him absolutely nothing. He said he needed to speak with her. She said she was available Thursday at 2. Not immediately. Not out of schedule. Thursday at 2. The way you speak to someone who no longer works for you and no longer owes you their time. He came to her office at the consulting firm, not his territory, not his building, her space, and sat across from her in a chair that was slightly too small for his frame and told her what the investigation had found. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I told you." He said, "I know." She said, "I told you clearly, and you chose the document over the person, and the person was right in front of you for 2 years." He said, "You are right. I did. And I am sorry." The apology landed in the room, and she sat with it without rushing to accept or reject it. He said he wanted her to come back. He said he understood if the answer was no. He said Weston Capital had not run properly since she left, and he was not telling her that to flatter her. He was telling her because it was operationally true and she deserved the truth. She looked at him with the clear, steady eyes that had always unnerved him slightly. Not because they were challenging, but because they were simply honest in a way that most people in his world were not. She said she would think about it. He said, "Take whatever time you need." She said, "I will." He left. She sat in her office afterward and looked at the wall and thought about what it meant to go back to a place that had failed you, whether it was weakness or whether it was something else, something that required more courage than leaving had. Midpoint question for you. If someone who wronged you came back with a genuine apology and real accountability, would you go back? Or has some damage changed the shape of things permanently? She went back. Not immediately. Not on his timeline. She negotiated new terms, a formal contract, a revised title, a salary adjustment that reflected what the role had always actually required. Dr. Osei released her graciously, with the warmth of a woman who understood that some chapters close so that others can open. Jade returned to Weston Capital 6 weeks after Caleb's visit to her office. The building felt the same and different simultaneously, familiar in its geography, changed in its atmosphere. People who had worked alongside her welcomed her back with the specific relief of a team that has been struggling and knows exactly why. She settled back into the operational rhythm of the place with the quiet efficiency that had always been her signature, and within 3 weeks the organization was running at a level it had not achieved in months. Victoria noticed her return the same day it happened. Caleb had not told her in advance. This was not a deliberate omission. He had simply not thought to mention it, which was itself a signal he was not yet reading correctly. Victoria had arrived at the office for a lunch date and walked past Jade's desk and stopped. The smile she offered was perfect. The calculation behind it was immediate. She had underestimated the problem the first time. The emails had been too subtle. They had removed Jade but left open the possibility of return. This time she needed something that would close the door permanently, something that could not be investigated its way back to her. Something that would make Jade herself want to leave. The second setup was cruder and more personal. Victoria waited for the right moment. A week when Caleb was traveling to London for a series of investor meetings, when the office was running on its secondary rhythm and Jade was managing everything in his absence. She arranged for a piece of jewelry, an expensive bracelet she had reported missing 2 months prior, to be found in Jade's desk drawer. She called Caleb in London. Her voice on the phone was distressed, reluctant, all the things a woman's voice should be when she is reporting something she wishes were not true. Caleb flew back early, and he made the same mistake twice. He called Jade into his office and showed her the bracelet and watched her face and saw the same expression he had seen the first time, the still shock of someone hearing an untruth, and he made the same decision he had made before. He suspended her pending investigation. He told himself he was following protocol. He told himself he was being measured and fair. She looked at him for a long moment. She said, "You already decided." He said, "I am following procedure." She said, "Caleb, you already decided. You looked at that bracelet and you saw a story and you chose it again." Her voice was not angry. That was the thing that broke something open in him later. Her voice was not angry. It was tired. The specific tiredness of a woman who has done everything right and been failed by the same judgment twice. She picked up her bag. She said, "I will save you the paperwork." She walked out for the second time. This time she did not make a list. This time she sat in her car in the parking structure for 20 minutes and let herself feel the full weight of it. Not just the injustice of this moment, but the pattern of it. The exhausting, familiar pattern of being a black woman whose competence was visible and whose character was always one accusation away from being questioned. Then she drove home. She called Simone. Simone said, "Jade." Jade said, "I know." Simone said, "What are you going to do?" Jade said, "I am going to be fine. I am always fine. But I am done with that building." Caleb did not sleep that night. He sat in his London hotel room. He had not gone back to his apartment, had checked into a hotel instead because the apartment felt too loud with the argument that was happening inside his own head, and he turned over what had happened with the precision he applied to every problem that mattered. Something was wrong. Not with Jade. He understood that now in the way you understand things when the noise settles and the clarity arrives whether you want it or not. 2 separate incidents. 2 identical responses from her. The same expression, the same steadiness, the same absence of the behavior guilty people exhibit. And 2 very different contexts for how the evidence had been presented to him. Both times, Victoria had been present. Not conspicuously, not dramatically, but present. Nearby, informed, in the room or adjacent to it when the narrative arrived. He called his security consultant at 6 in the morning. He said, "The bracelet. I need you to verify the chain of custody from the moment it was reported missing." He said, "And I need you to pull the security footage from the executive floor for the past 2 weeks." The consultant called back 4 hours later. The footage showed Victoria entering the building on a Tuesday afternoon while Jade was at an external meeting. The footage showed her in the corridor outside the executive assistant offices. The footage showed what it showed. Caleb sat with this for a long time. Then he called Victoria. The conversation was short and very quiet. He was not a man who raised his voice. He was a man who became more precise when he was most controlled, and the precision with which he laid out what he had found gave Victoria no room to construct an alternative narrative. She tried anyway. He said, "Do not." She stopped. He said, "You did this twice. You did this to a woman who had done nothing to you except exist in a room near me. You did this deliberately, and you allowed me to be the instrument of it, and I need you to understand that I am not angry at you right now. I am finished with you." He ended the engagement that evening. He sent Jade a message that night. Not through his assistant. Not through a formal channel. From his personal phone, in his own words, at 11:45 at night. It said, "I was wrong twice. I know that is not enough. I know you have no reason to respond. But I found everything and I needed you to know that I see the full picture now, and I am deeply sorry, and you deserve to hear that regardless of what comes next." Jade read it at midnight. She did not respond that night. She lay in her apartment looking at the strip of sky through the fire escape window and felt something complicated and not entirely unresolved, and let herself feel all of it without rushing to decide what it meant. He did not call once and expect an answer. That was the first thing that was different this time. Caleb Weston had built his entire career on decisive action. Identify the problem, determine the solution, implement it completely. He had applied that model to most things in his life, including the ones that did not respond well to it. He understood now that this was one of those things. He sent a formal written apology, not an email, a letter, handwritten, 3 pages, that arrived at Jade's apartment on a Saturday morning. He did not ask her to return in the letter. He did not ask her for anything. He simply told her the truth about what had happened, what he had found, what he should have done differently both times, and what her presence had meant to the organization and to him personally. He sent it, and then he waited. 2 weeks passed. 3. Joel told him to be patient. He said he was being patient. Joel said, "You are being anxious and calling it patience." Caleb conceded the point. Jade called on a Thursday morning. She said she had read the letter. He said he was glad it had reached her. She said she had some conditions. He said, "Name them." She named them. A formal executive director title. Not secretary, not assistant, not a word that diminished the scope of what she actually did. A seat at the leadership table. A direct reporting line to the board in addition to him. And one more thing, she said. If you ever again choose a document over the person standing in front of you without fully investigating both, I will leave, and I will not come back, and you will not call me. He said, agreed. Without hesitation. She said, I will start Monday. What followed was not a fairy tale. They were not suddenly transformed people operating in a transformed world. Caleb was still the man he had always been, precise, occasionally sealed, better at decisions than at vulnerability. Jade was still the woman she had always been. Clear-eyed, self-possessed, not available to perform gratitude for being given what she had always deserved. But something was different now. He had seen her clearly, finally, completely, without the interference of someone else's narrative. And she had seen something in him that was worth staying for. Not the CEO, not the title, not the building. The man who had sat down and written 3 pages by hand, because some things deserve more than an email. Weston Capital ran better than it ever had. And on a Tuesday evening 6 months after she came back, he stopped in the doorway of her office on his way out of the building. Something he had started doing, just stopping, just to say something small and real on the way past. And she looked up from her desk, and they held a moment between them that had no name yet, but that both of them understood was no longer just professional. He said, "Good work this week." She said, "I know." He smiled. She turned back to her screen, but she was smiling too. He fired her twice. Both times the wrong person convinced him to. Both times she walked out with her dignity completely intact, not because the situation did not hurt, but because she had decided a long time ago that her worth was not a verdict other people got to deliver. And when the truth finally arrived, and truth always arrives, it is only ever a matter of timing. He came back with accountability instead of excuses. She did not take him back because she needed him. She took him back because she chose to. That is the difference that matters. Final question for you. Have you ever had to decide whether going back to something that failed you once was strength or weakness? And how did you know which one it was? Leave your answer below. There is no wrong response. Your voice belongs in this conversation. If this story stayed with you today, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that their excellence speaks for itself, and that the people who failed to protect it will eventually have to live with that. I love you all. I will see you in the next story.